He would ignore every murmur, every sound variation, but the words he already knew by heart were the ones that haunted him the most. Don't complicate things. Just do it. They will never check. His sentences were spinning in a loop in his mind, and at each repetition his anger grew. The detective's rejection only fed his determination. He wanted him to cry in silence. He let the matter fall. But he couldn't. He wouldn't do it. The image of Princess crossed his mind, his big smile when she showed him her last drawing, his laugh when she patted him on his kitchen. She deserved better than that. In the morning, William had a plan. He called Clara and asked her to join him at his place. As soon as she arrived, he started talking before she could sit down. He said, making the 100 steps in the living room. The cops won't even look at the evidence. So we're going to find someone who will do it. Clara raised eyebrows. Who exactly? Everyone we talked to has removed that, as if it was paranoia. William stopped, biting his lips. The media, he said finally. We make it public. If we can't get answers by normal ways, we will force them to react. Clara hesitated. William, are you sure? Once it's out, you won't be able to come back. People could attack you for that, or worse, distort the story. I don't care, he replied dryly before softening. I can't give up, Clara. If they've hidden something, if they let it die because of negligence, or worse, then we can't let them hide that. Clara accepted. Later in the day, William contacted a local television station, leaving messages to all the journalists he could find. The hours went by without a reply, and despair was rumbling until a young journalist named Julia Reyes called him back. I saw your email, she said, and I looked at the recording. William turned off the phone. And, there is definitely something strange, she replied. But it will not be easy. Funeral homes do not open the cemeteries after the burial, without a reason or authorization. He did not have any authorization, William replied quickly. I would never have allowed that. So we need more evidence, Julia said. See you tomorrow and bring everything you have. William hung up. 100 years for the first time since the death of Princess, a glimmer of hope. The next day, he and Clara met Julia in a quiet cafe on the outskirts of the city. She was younger than William had imagined, in her 20s, with a piercing gaze and a determined attitude. I want to help you, she said as she left a notebook. But if we want to spread this story, we have to go further. We need evidence of negligence or immobility. The following days, Julia began to assemble the puzzle pieces. She searched the funeral home's history and discovered previous complaints for poor management of bodies and falsification of documents. William was not surprised, but his revelations gave him chills. Meanwhile, William and Clara tried to find employees who were likely to speak. After several failures, they found an old employee ready to meet them. Foster, a man of about 40 years old, having left the funeral home in troubled circumstances, agreed to meet them one late night in a diner. Foster looked nervous, his eyes constantly twinkling the room. I don't know what you're expecting from me, he said, mumbling his cup of coffee. The truth, William replied, looking at him. My daughter's body was handled after the funeral. I need to know why. Foster's hands were shaking. Do you think you're the first? William froze. What do you mean by that? Foster swallowed hard. They've been doing it for years. Sloppy procedures. Cover up their mistakes. Sometimes it's a poorly done embalming. Sometimes it's worse. Worse. Foster hesitated. He reused the collection, he said. They exchanged bodies to earn some space. Sometimes they damaged the shards and had to repair them in a hurry. If your daughter's body was moved, it means they were hiding something. William felt his stomach knot. He wanted to scream, turn the table around, but he forced himself to stay calm. Would you like to testify? He asked Julia, breaking the silence. Foster shook his head. I can't. They'll come after me. They've already come after me, William replied calmly. They vandalized my car. They made me understand that they didn't want me to ask questions. But I won't back down. Foster looked at him for a long time before sighing. I'll think about it, he said. Foster hesitated. He reused the collection, he said. They exchanged bodies to earn some space. Sometimes they damaged the shards and had to repair them in a hurry. If your daughter's body was moved, it means they were hiding something. William felt his stomach knot. He wanted to scream, turn the table around, but he forced himself to stay calm. Would you like to testify? He asked Julia, breaking the silence. Foster shook his head. I can't. They'll come after me. They've already come after me, William replied calmly. They vandalized my car. They made me understand that they didn't want me to ask questions. But I won't back down. Foster looked at him for a long time before sighing. I'll think about it, he said before leaving the dinner early. William didn't know if he would see Foster again, but he didn't want to give up. During the following week, Julia pushed the investigation further. She found files indicating that the princess's embezzlement had been failed and incomplete. The funeral home had modified documents so that everything seemed routine, but the inconsistencies were obvious. Julia published her first article. It detailed the suspicions of William, the recording, and the past troubles of the funeral home. The story spread quickly, arousing indignation in the community. People began to share their own experiences of discrimination and negligence. But attention also brought dangers. One night, William woke up and discovered the word "stop digging" and stuck a bomb on his garage door. His phone kept ringing, calls from hidden numbers, some leaving threatening messages. Clara wanted him to stop. We are too close, William replied. They are afraid. That means we do what we have to do. Under the pressure of the media, the police opened the investigation again. William watched the justice. During this time, Julia discovered a deeper connection. One of the owners of the funeral home had links with local hospitals, raising questions about body remittances and profits. The puzzle pieces were beginning to come together, but William knew the battle was far from over. One evening, while he was sitting with Clara to examine the evidence, his phone vibrated. It was Foster. They come after me, he said, trembling voice. I need protection. I will testify, but you must help me. William's blood froze. He agreed to meet Foster the next day, but he had the feeling that the danger was far from over. As he watched the unfinished drawing of Princess, the one she had left on the table the day of her death, he felt his determination getting stronger. He would not let her down. Not now, not ever. William barely slept the night before the audience. He sat in his living room, surrounded by piles of documents. The clock was moving towards dawn, but he did not notice the passing time. His thoughts were spinning in a loop. Princess, the funeral home, and everything he had to face to get there. The threats had not ceased. Anonymous calls continued to come late at night, their voices low and threatening. You will regret it, said a caller. William was content to hang up, adjusting his phone to record the next calls. He had overcome the fear. All that mattered to William was to go to the end. Foster, the former employee of the funeral home, had finally agreed to testify in front of the court. His decision was risky. He had already lost his job and feared for his safety. William had proposed to host him, but Foster had refused, preferring to settle down with a cousin outside the city. Continue fighting, said Foster before leaving. Don't let them bury this case. These words were in William's mind. Don't let them bury this case. When William arrived at the court the next morning, the atmosphere was electric. Protesters were holding on to their marches, waving signs that said, "Justice for princesses," and "No to negligence." Journalists were gathering at the entrance, pulling their microphones to anyone who seemed important. Clara joined him at the entrance and held his arm. Are you ready for that? She asked. William nodded. Although his stomach was knotted, he was not ready. He would never be. But he could not back down now. Inside the audience room, the atmosphere was tense. The lawyers of the funeral home were stiff, impeccably dressed in oversized costumes surrounded by assistants. On the other hand, William was sitting with his lawyer, Angela Reed, a determined woman recommended by Julia Ray as the journalist who revealed the case. Stay calm, said Angela. No matter what they say, don't lose your cool. William, with his head held high, grabbed the edge of the table as the judge entered the room. The criminal statements were brutal. The lawyers of the funeral home disdained William as a father in debt, having let paranoia obscure his judgment. They attacked the hidden camera images, calling them unadmissible and unreliable, claiming that the voices were distorted by a poor audio quality and could come from anywhere. Angela replied with the facts, the echoes on Princess, the earth under her nails, and the history of the complaints against the funeral home. Then, she broadcast the recording in front of the court. The murmurs filled the room, their cold cruelty cutting through the air like knives. Don't complicate things, just do it. They will never check. William watched the faces of the jury during the listening. Some were trembling, others turned away from the gaze, and some fixed their right in front of them, their expressions becoming harder. Then Foster testified. His beginnings were hesitant. His voice trembled, and he crushed his hands. But as he spoke, his confidence grew. He described in detail the practices of the funeral home, the reuse of the cemeteries, the manipulation of bodies to hide mistakes. We were told that no one would notice, especially not families like his, he said by naming William. The room became silent. William's heart was beating at full speed. He knew that this moment was crucial. The words of Foster weighed heavily on sense. The defense tried to discredit Foster, evoking his license and insinuating that he had a grudge against the funeral home. But Foster remained firm, refusing to give up. When the pleas were finished, William felt empty. The judge ordered a break, and William went out to get some fresh air. Clara followed him, putting a hand on his shoulder. William was struggling. "It's not enough," he said. "Not yet." The verdict was given 3 days later. The audience room was full when the jury returned. William was out of breath while the jury chief was getting up to read the decision. "Guilty," she said. A wave of relief invaded William, but it was short-term. The funeral home was doomed to pay damages to interest, and several employees, including the director, were inculcated. But this verdict would not bring back Princess. After the sentence was pronounced, William went to his daughter's grave. The cemetery seemed different to him, less oppressive, although the weight on his chest remained. He kneeled before the stone, making his fingers slide on the name of Princess. "I did it, my dear," he murmured. "I would have made them see." Clara was holding on to a few steps, leaving some space for him. When he finally got up, she slipped her hand into hers. "They will not be able to hurt anyone now," she said. William was relieved, although the pain in his chest persisted. In the following weeks, William focused his efforts on the creation of something positive from his loss. He launched the Princess Johnson Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to the fight against discrimination and negligence in healthcare and funeral services. Julia Reyes continued to cover the case, maintaining public attention on the case and pleading for legislative changes. The threats finally ceased, but William never forgot the fear he had invaded during those long nights. He kept the camera that had triggered everything, like a reminder of the battle he had won and the daughter he had lost. One afternoon, while he was tidying up the princess room, William found his unfinished drawing, the one of two under a tree. He put it in the frame and hung it in the living room. "Always together, Dad." His words under the drawing resonated in his mind while he was contemplating it. The tears rolled up in her eyes. But this time, they were not only sad, they were filled with love, hope, and the promise he had kept. William went out, letting the soft breeze wrap him. For the first time in months, he felt he could breathe. Princess was no longer there, but her memory was alive, just like the quest for justice she had inspired. While he was lying in the sun, William knew the battle was not over. He had families like his own, families who needed someone to stand up for them. And he was ready. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you're watching us from. And don't forget to love and subscribe to the incredible stories of Mel and Romeo for other inspiring stories. Thank you for your support.